This tutorial is for airbrushing skulls. Seems like when most beginners start to become familiar with the basics, it's one of the most commonly tackled subjects to paint. So that's what we're going to be covering in this instructional video today. First, I start by drawing a skull on paper. Now, I've been tattooing for 15 years, so this happens to be an image that I'm rather familiar with. For some of you, this might require a little practice, just like airbrushing does. So for the purpose of this video, you can trace one from the internet. However, I do encourage you to exercise your drawing abilities, as it will improve your artistic skills and help you become a better airbrush artist too. So with that, let's get started.
Once I have the skull drawn, I typically like to resize it on a photocopier to get it the best fit my substrate. I start by cutting out all the dark areas of the image with an X-Acto knife to create a paint mask and template to map out the design and create hard edges where necessary. I chose to print the mask for my skull on a slightly thicker paper by cutting some drawing paper down to 8.5 by 11. Unless you go with a really heavy weighted paper, this usually won't give your printer any issues. X-Acto knives are very sharp, so pay attention while you work, and toss down something to protect your table from the inevitable gashes you'll leave behind if you don't. In this case, I chose the back of a drawing pad. After I get everything all cut out, it'll be time to start painting. Today I'm working with clayboard. I find that it's great for art projects like this because it already has a scuffed, porous surface. So all you really need to do is remove it from the plastic packaging and lay a black base without worrying about priming the surface first. As you can see, I have already done this. Next, I haze some white over the canvas and apply the mask where I want it. Then I switch to some black to get the basic shape down. I usually print some high quality reference photos from kinkos if I'm going for realism, but today I printed off a skull from a similar angle with the printer in my house, and so I'm just going to use them as a loose reference and keep things a little simple. Now that I have a basic guideline for the artwork, I want to start in with some more white to begin building the highlights until I get everything completely oversaturated with white, because we're going to return with a medium gray to bring back some of that depth once we finish this step. Now, if this were a white surface, I'd start in with a light gray and work all the darker values, then gradually add more and more black to the mixture and continue working those darkest areas until I made my way to a heavily reduced black for the deepest areas. But be careful when you're working with black, because a lot of people get too heavy with it. Remember that black is the absence of all light, so if you choose to work with a white or a lighter base, just be careful not to go too dark. Since the base color of our canvas today is black, we can get away with going a bit darker. One thing I've noticed is that many newcomers don't add nearly enough white before switching back to black, so really don't be afraid to use too much white. Here I've gotten out some reduced black and grab dark paint mask again to clean up some of those edges I mentioned earlier. I've just swapped airbrushes with a mixture of about 65% white to 35% black and begin to add detail. I prefer to use urethane-based paints because I find they clean and mix much more easily than water-based paints, and they don't seem to give you tip dry, which is when paint begins to accumulate on your needle because the urethane solvents dissolve the paint instead of build up as air passing over the needle dries, whereas water-based paints don't break down this collection and can clog the needle and cause a lot of problems. If you're using water-based paints, just be mindful and periodically check for this tip dry. Sometimes it will seem like not as much paint is coming out, so beginners will pull back on the trigger further and further until that dried paint obstructing your nozzle finally blows off and out comes a fire hose of paint behind it, which can really destroy your artwork if you're in the final stages of your project adding the small details. If you are using urethane-based paints, it's important that you're in a well-ventilated area. In my case, it's rather cold, so I'm working inside rather than in the garage. So I've put a fan in the window blowing outward to suck out the fumes and turned on a space heater to maintain the temperature in the room. Also, as a matter of safety, I wear a respirator which filters out some of these fumes. However, even if you're working with water-based paints, I recommend you wear one to prevent all the small airborne particles of paint from getting in your lungs. People don't realize how much paint you're actually breathing in. Back when I was using acrylic paints and I wasn't using a respirator, I would blow my nose after I completed some artwork, and out comes like the palette of colors I was working with that night. So take that into consideration. I want to preserve my highlights, so now I've cleaned out my airbrush and used white reduced with 50% Intercoat Clear, which is essentially a clear base. I use that instead of paint thinner to maintain its viscosity. If you thin out the paint too much, the solvents can cut right through the paint you've already put down on the base coat. Or if you're working with water-based paints and you over-reduce with water, your paint can spider out and run everywhere. I'm pretty sure some manufacturers make something similar to an Intercoat Clear if you are using acrylics. I've gotten out the template once more and used black to clean up the edges. I'm really not too concerned about all the excessive overspray. In fact, I've actually added a little more around the perimeter to give it a simplistic background of sorts, so it's not just a skull floating around like a sticker on my canvas. Here I've gotten out some heavily reduced black. It's mostly just Intercoat Clear and paint reducer mixed with about, I don't know, 5 or 6 drops of black. I want to gradually build the deepest areas without the risk of going too dark too quickly. Sometimes my hands tend to get a little clammy when I work, so to avoid getting oils from my skin on the surface, you'll notice that I'm wearing gloves. Not everyone uses them, but personally I've had problems with the clear coat laying down evenly on the areas I rest my hands frequently. I'm using 2 airbrushes for this project, so I don't have to clean out all the paint in one just to immediately mix the same color again 5 minutes later. These 2 airbrushes are both Iwatas. The first is a good gravity feed airbrush to get started with. It's an HP CS. The other one that I'm primarily using today is a Micron CMC+, and it's better suited for rendering a lot of fine detail. Some more about equipment before you guys start wondering. The compressor that I'm running is another Iwata product. It's the Sprint Jet, which I run at about 18 to 20 psi when working on projects this size. Next I add in a bit more black, maybe about 30% black to 70% intercoat clear, and continue stacking to achieve those deepest values. If any of you guys out there are thinking about trying urethane paints, I recommend House of Color. Their BC and SG lines are both solid bases. That's important because you don't want to accidentally order like some metallic or pearls. They only carry about half a dozen colors, including black and white in solid colors. But if you study your color theory, you don't really need an arsenal of colors to mix the precise pigment you're trying to achieve. I typically do a bunch of color portrait work using these limited paint colors, and I never have too much trouble making the exact tone I need. If you do choose to purchase some urethane-based paints, you'll need to reduce them quite a bit. What I do is I'll buy a 2-ounce bottle from an airbrush supply distribution company like Coast Airbrush, and then I'll pour it into an empty 8-ounce bottle, which they should also sell. And then I'll fill the remainder of the bottle with Fast Reducer. Sometimes I even reduce it a little bit more while I'm painting to get that perfect ratio. The finer the detail, the more I like to thin my paint so it can flow through my airbrush smoothly. Now I'm using that same black to add some more variation in the background and make it a little more interesting to look at. After completing a project, I always clear coat it, whether it's a motorcycle or even simply an art project. It will protect all your hard work, give it a smooth, consistent finish, and keep it looking good for years. For automotive work, I'll use a 2-part catalyst clear because it's a lot tougher. But for something small like this, I like to save a lot of unnecessary time cleaning equipment and spray it with a couple coats of canned clear. Personally, I use U-Pol. That's the letter U, P-O-L, clear number 1. It's almost as good as a regular clear. It dries super glossy, and you don't really need something that can braid the elements if it's just going to hang on your wall. And lastly, I'm just adding a few little details here and there to give it a final touch before I take it in my booth and spray it. And here's our finished product after I've sprayed it with a few coats of clear. Another benefit of clear coating your work is that it really brings out the depths, giving you an honest perspective of the full spectrum of values in your work.
I hope you guys like this instructional film. If you found this tutorial helpful, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos. You can also find me online on some of your favorite social media sites like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or on my website at www.robbiecass.com. Thanks again for watching and have a fantastic day.